So, if you're a brand new coach or a consultant who's just getting started with sales and selling, and you really come from a non sales background, and every single time you hear the word sales and selling, you're filled with these feelings of guilt or feeling salesy or feeling manipulative, then this video is for you. So, how do you sell your coaching without feeling guilty or salesy or manipulative? So, let's get straight in. We'll be exploring where these feelings are coming from and what is it that you can do to get around that. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to show you is that if you're having this feeling, be assured that you're not the only one. In fact, most people who are getting started with sales and are coming from a non-sales background, they tend to have these sort of feelings. Now, if you're a beginner, then you are going to feel a little bit salesy and yucky and a little bit icky about sales and selling. So those are the feelings that most people get. Now, if you're feeling that, let me assure you that that's a good sign as well, because it's a sign of integrity as far as I see it, right? It's, I would be concerned if somebody does not have these feelings, because it only shows that you care. You care about how you come across to the world. You care as to how people perceive you. So it's really a sign of integrity. It's a sign that you care. So if you have that sign, it's a good thing. It's a good starting point. Let me assure you that. We just need to figure out how to overcome that and how to manage those voices inside, which is something that we're going to talk about in this video. So let's go a little bit deeper. Now, when I started my sales career back in 2003, I used to feel exactly the same, right? That's how I actually started. And I was carrying that feeling of, being salesy, the feeling that, I'm guilty that I'm selling, or selling was just something that I was not quite comfortable with. And I didn't really have a good perception about selling. Let's just put it that way. And I carried that belief for like good 2 years, and I'll tell you the reason why I carried that belief. One was because even before I got into selling, I generally had a negative perception about selling. Why? It's because, we grow up hearing phrases like, snake oil salesman, uh, selling ice to an Eskimo, and those kind of things, right? They're generally used in a negative connotation. So I had a negative perception about selling. And I always thought that in order to be successful with sales and selling, you've got to be a little bit sly, or you can't be 100% honest or authentic and still be a good salesperson. You have to be a little bit shady to be a good salesperson. That was my mentality. And that actually got confirmed when I started my first sales job back in 2003 at a call center. And when I saw people around me, a couple of them who were just sitting, operating right next to me, they were doing things that were not quite right, or I would not do that. And that confirmed my belief that, in order to be good at selling, you have to be a little bit shady. You can't be really 100% clean and be a good salesperson. I carried that belief for good 2.5 years, and my results were pathetic. But something changed in mid 2005 when I started a brand new sales job, and that was a 100% commission role. And it was one of the most shadiest sales jobs that most people would run away from. But I didn't have an option because I was overseas and I was on this international student visa. So my job opportunities were very limited. So I just took on whatever came to me. And direct sales is one of the jobs that was just easily available because it was a 100% commission role. So anybody could take that role. So just to make some money, pay off my bills and my tuition fees, I took that role. And that is where the magic really happened, because it was in that job. I know this is going to sound surprising. That is exactly where I saw a couple of my team leaders who did sales the right way. They approached people with respect, they asked the right questions, they were transparent in their presentation, and they were very upfront. They never really hid any details, they weren't hiding any details, and they were really upfront and transparent, and they did all the right things, and they still were able to close deals, and they were able to get customers at the end of the day. And when I saw these guys doing it the right way, that was the first time in my head I told myself that, okay, selling can be done this way as well. You can be authentic, you can be honest, and you still can be excellent with sales and selling. You don't have to be shady, right? You can still have 100% authentic, right, and honest character and bring your ethics, bring all your integrity to the field and still be good with your numbers. So that's when my mindset, my belief around sales and selling really changed. But the reason why I was carrying that negative belief is because I had seen, number one is I already had negative perception about sales, but then I already saw those guys in 2003 in my first sales job. I saw them doing it in a way that I wouldn't personally do it because it was just not right ethically. And that's the reason why I felt that sales is, you've got to be salesy, you've got to be, it's manipulative. So the point that I'm trying to make with that little story is that if you're feeling guilty about sales and selling, or if you're feeling uh, salesy, it's most likely because you saw an example where somebody was selling in a way that was not quite right, or it was either being done to somebody else, or it probably was being done to you. Either ways, you said that if that is what selling is, I don't want to do anything with selling. So that's a narrative that you created out of that experience, and that's a story that you told yourself, and that story kind of it became consolidated with your system, and that became your belief, and that belief became your block. That's one of the reasons why most people from a non-sales background think that selling is salesy, and they're carrying that guilt towards selling as a profession because they've seen the wrong example. So that's one reason as to where that feeling comes from. The other reason where this feeling comes from, which adds more complexity to the case, is, see, in childhood, we are told things like, if you were born and raised in a middle class family like me, most likely you were told these things: don't ask for much, don't disturb, don't trouble people, stay quiet. You probably were told these things. And the problem with this is when we grow up and when we get into adulthood and when we start selling, these things, they completely go against what is required to be successful in sales and selling. Because in selling, we have to ask questions, you have to state our price, we have to address objections, we have to take the courage to ask for the sale. We've got to do all these things. So given the childhood conditioning that we've had in the past and what we need to do once we get into a coaching or a consulting business, and when we have to start selling, is completely, it kind of contradicts each other. So your entire system goes into a conflict because in childhood you were told all these things, and when you grow up and you start your own business, when it's time for you to start selling, you have to do all these things, ask questions, which is completely opposite to what we were taught as kids. Don't ask too much, state our price, don't disturb people, handle objections, don't trouble people, don't talk back to elders, right? Ask for the sale, stay quiet. You see that conditioning? So the way we were conditioned as kids is was not the most healthiest way. It doesn't really help when we have to step out and step up and start selling. So that's another reason why we are carrying those feelings of shame and guilt. It's just that conditioning. We feel that everything that we were taught as kids, it's not something that helps when it's time for us to start selling. So the other thing is, a lot of us, we associate selling with taking only, which means, somewhere inside your head, you're telling yourself that, hey, you know what? I'm taking something from my prospects. I'm taking something from them. I'm getting somebody to part away from their hard earned money. So in your head, you are, or the perception that you're having is, you're thinking that selling is all about taking away from somebody. That's one more reason why you feel guilty about selling, about asking for the sale. So this is another thing that kind of blocks us from getting out there and really asking for business. So These are the four main blocks that we've discussed so far. The first thing is that we've got pre-existing negative connotations. All the things, all the phrases that we've heard: snake oil salesman, selling ice to an Eskimo, those kind of things, they don't help us because that is just used in a negative way, in a negative connotation. The second thing is wrong reference points or unethical reference points or incompatible reference points. You saw somebody else selling in a way that made you go, oh my God, if that's what selling is, I don't want to sell, because just the way they did it was probably aggressive, was too pushy, was too salesy, or it's not something that people like you and I would do, because we want to sell in a way that's more aligned and authentic to our personality. So you saw somebody doing that, and that created your narrative, that created the belief, and that belief became a block. And then we've got the childhood conditioning, all the things that I shared with you. And then you have this selling is taking mindset. So you see all these four different blocks. We've got this deeply rooted in our system. And that's the reason why it becomes so hard for people from a non sales background to start selling when it's time for them to step up and start selling themselves to the world, selling their program or service to the world. And this actually snowballs into a bigger problem. What really happens is you understate your value, you hold back instead of leading. And what I mean by that is there will be times where, when in your needs discovery, when you're doing a due diligence, when you're asking questions, there will be times when you have to ask some tough questions, or there will be times when you have to, gently and respectfully nudge the prospect and challenge their status quo thinking. And we can't really do that when you are holding yourself back because of the block of guilt or that salesy feeling. And then you avoid asking for the sale together. And all of this, eventually, what happens is it ends up sabotaging your own business, because you're not asking for the sale and you're struggling to ask for it. And it's just not helping you bring that revenue that you have to bring into your business. So that's how it snowballs into a bigger problem. So, how do we actually deal with this feeling of guilt or salesy? So the first thing, I'm going to talk about just this one here in this video, because I'm quite mindful. I don't want to drag this video too long. So I'm going to talk about just this part here, the wrong reference point. The way you do this is you separate the profession from the person. That's a quick, short answer to that. And what I mean by that is, let me explain this with an example. But again, just as a reminder, for starters, you're feeling salesy or you're feeling guilty is because you saw someone selling in a way to you or someone else that you just don't want or you didn't like. But connecting that experience to this analogy, when you look at this object on the screen, and if I were to ask you this one question, is this object or is this tool, is it a good tool or is it a bad tool? In most cases, people would generally say that it's a bad tool. Why? Because that's how the brain is, right? We generally tend to think negative if it's not conditioned properly. Most people will say it's a bad tool. But is that right? What we're doing is we again are bringing some negative experiences or some negative events that we've seen in the news that is not right, and immediately we are jumping to the conclusion that it's actually a bad tool. But in reality, the question that we need to be asking is, who is in possession of this tool and what is the intention really? Because if you put this object in the hands of someone who's been brainwashed or who's been trained or conditioned incorrectly, they will spread fear. But at the same time, if you put this tool in the hands of someone who's been trained correctly, who's been conditioned correctly, who has been given the right training, the right values, who has the right belief system, they will go on to protect an entire nation. That's what soldiers do, right? They carry a gun, they carry this tool, but they use it for the right reasons, to protect. They don't spread fear. But if you put it in the wrong hands, it's going to spread fear and terror. The point that I'm trying to make with this analogy is that it's not the tool or the object that is bad per se. It really is the person who's in possession of this tool. And selling is exactly like that. And what I mean by that is, see, selling in itself is not a bad thing. It's just an activity. But what determines if it's good or bad is really who is the person who's actually doing that selling. If the person's been trained correctly, if they're coming to market with the right intention, and if they are asking the right questions, if they're doing the right presentation, and if they are closing deals the right way, ethically, then it's a very noble thing because they're actually solving somebody's problem, a problem that the prospect is willing to pay money for. But if somebody's got the wrong intention and if they're just looking to, take people's money and then just disappear, then that's the person's character, that person's intention. So it's not selling per se that is wrong. And therefore, we need to disassociate, or we need to separate the profession from the person, right? So selling is just a profession, it's just another activity, right? So if you separate that out from and see who is the person who's actually doing it and what is their intention, if they're coming to the market with the right intention and they're doing the right things, then it's actually a very noble thing because they're solving somebody's problem. But if it's being done by somebody else who's doing unethical things, then for them, definitely they're using selling as a bad thing. That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you here. It's the intention of the person who's selling is what really matters here. So the next time when you get that little voice inside you that says, selling is salesy or it's manipulative or I feel guilty when it's time for me to sell, then you really need to calm that voice down and really ask that question: what is really my intention? And if my intention is to genuinely help people, if I have that intention, then selling is not manipulation. So we need not feel guilty or salesy. Selling really is my ability to authentically solve someone's problem. That's what really selling is. Selling means solving somebody's problem, right? So the next time you have that little inner voice that's trying to protect you or that's trying to stop you from getting out there and achieving your goals and dreams, then this is how you manage that inner voice. This is how you counterattack that inner voice and calm that inner voice down, right? So that's about it. I'm going to leave you right here. I hope you found some value in this. If you did, give me a thumbs up, or otherwise just leave your feedback in the comments and I'll see how to improve it next time. Good luck, and I'll see you soon.